Do you know the story of the only successful armed rebellion since the Revolution? Well, if not, you're going to find out today. So let's get started. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and today we are talking about the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, which took place on Election Day, 1946. Polls for the county election opened on August 1st, 1946, with about 200 armed deputies who had turned out to patrol the precincts. The normal complement of 15 deputies, significantly bolstered by reinforcements from other counties. So the day progresses, and as the polls closed, deputies seized the ballot boxes and took them to the county jail. At this time, World War II veterans opposed to the corruption of McMinn County responded by arming themselves and marching there to the jailhouse. Some of them had raided the National Guard Armory, which is about 14 miles from the jail. Here you see the modern building, but in the same location. Anyway, these men were able to obtain arms and ammunition for themselves. Back to Athens. Estimates of the number of veterans besieging the jail vary from several hundred to as high as 2,000. When the men reached the jailhouse, it was barricaded and manned by 55 of those deputies that I mentioned earlier. The veterans demanded the ballot boxes so they could verify the count and ensure an honest election, but they were refused. They then opened fire on the jail, initiating a battle that lasted upwards of several hours by some accounts. And in the end, the door of the jail was dynamited, exploded, and breached. The barricaded deputies, some with injuries, surrendered, and the ballot boxes were recovered. But how did we get here? All right. Citizens of McMinn County had long been concerned about political corruption and possible election fraud for years. The U.S. Department of Justice had investigated allegations of electoral fraud in 1940, 1942, and 1944, but had not taken any action. This system of corruption got its start in McMinn County in 1936 with the election of Paul Cantrell, the Democratic candidate for sheriff. Cantrell, who came from a family of money and influence in nearby Etowah, tied his campaign closely to the popularity of Roosevelt's administration and rode FDR's coattails to victory over his Republican opponent. Paul Cantrell was elected sheriff in the 1936, 1938, and 1940 elections and was elected to the state senate in 1942 and 1944, while his former deputy, Pat Mansfield, was elected sheriff. A state law enacted in 1941 had reduced local political opposition by reducing the number of voting precincts from 23 down to 12 and reducing the number of justices of the peace from 14 down to 7, with 4 of which being on Cantrell's payroll. The sheriff and his deputies worked under a fee system whereby they received money for every person they booked, incarcerated, and released. The more arrests, the more money they made. Buses passing through the county were often pulled over, and the passengers were randomly ticketed for drunkenness, whether guilty or not. So in the August 1946 election, Paul Cantrell was once again a candidate for sheriff, while Pat Mansfield sought the state senate seat. After World War II ended, some 3,000 military veterans, constituting about 10% of the county population in total, had returned to McMinn County. And some of the returning veterans resolved to challenge Cantrell's political control by fielding their own nonpartisan candidates and working for a fraud-free election. They called themselves the GI Nonpartisan League. Veteran Bill White described the veterans' motivation. Quote, he says, "There were several beer joints and honky-tonks around Athens. We were pretty wild. We started having trouble with the law enforcement at that time because they started making a habit of picking up GIs and fining them heavily for most anything. They were kind of making a racket out of it. After long, hard years of service, most of us were hardcore veterans of World War II. We were used to drinking our liquor and our beer without being molested. When these things happened, the GIs got madder. The more GIs they arrested, the more they beat up, the madder we got." Unquote. Combat veteran Knox Henry stood as candidate for sheriff in opposition to Cantrell. In advertisements and speeches, the GI candidates promised an honest ballot count and reform of county government. At a rally, a GI speaker said, quote, "The principles that we fought for in this past war do not exist in McMinn County. We fought for democracy because we believe in democracy, but not the form that we live under in this county." Unquote. During the fight at the jail, rioting had broken out in Athens, mainly targeting police cars. This continued even after the ballot boxes were recovered, but subsided by morning. Now take a look. Looking at the town today, there is not much evidence of the fight. The old jail has been torn down and moved a couple of miles south of town. All that's left is this parking lot with a small memorial. You can see the sign here. This is just down the block from the actual historical marker that tells the story. All right, let's get back to the story. The recovered ballots certified the election of the 5 GI nonpartisan league candidates. Among the reforms instituted was a change in the method of payment and a $5,000 salary cap for officials. In the initial momentum of victory, gambling houses in collusion with the Cantrell regime were raided and their operations demolished. Deputies of the prior administration resigned and were replaced. The new government encouraged challenges, including at least 11 resignations of county administrators. On January 4th of 1947, 4 of the 5 leaders of the GI Nonpartisan League declared in an open letter, quote, "We abolished one machine only to replace it with another and more powerful one in the making," unquote. The League failed to establish itself permanently, and traditional political parties soon returned to power. So, although they were not 100% successful, they did accomplish something. They fixed an immediate problem and set the precedent for the future. Now, what about you? Have you ever heard this story before? I tell you, if you're like me, I'm guessing you haven't. I just heard this recently. And I'll tell you, it's these kind of stories of history that keep me going, because there's always more than meets the eye if you dig just a little bit deeper. Do you know of any other bits of history that I should look into? Tell you what, if you do, tell me in the comments below. While you're there, go ahead and hit the like button for me so YouTube knows to share this video with everybody. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. You know, if that button's red, let's turn it gray. And be sure to check out my other videos like you see to the side over here. I have other history videos, random history like this, or 360 videos that you can look all the way around. I've got a bunch, so check them out because I know you're going to like them. All right? So for Virtual History 360, I'm Mr. Wade. I'll see you next time.